Hello everyone, and welcome back to Newton Grove. In this video I'm going to show you how I model concrete. You can see here by the photographs of Rosegrove Shed, concrete was used quite extensively around locomotive depots, not just for ash pits, but you can also see in the background there, you've got the concrete columns and the supporting beams on top and through the shed as well. Now, how do we make that? I found a way which is very simple, very effective, and it's very easy to do. It doesn't take a lot of time either. So let's get into this little tutorial about how I make concrete, and you can do the same thing too, and really just get that wow factor. To start off with, I just use these 10mm by 10mm plastic card strips to make my columns. I didn't worry about cutting the length just yet, I'll get to that later. Well, you can see here, concrete has got a lot of texture. There's cracks, there's bubbles, there's perforations, there's scores. How do we actually achieve that in a model? Well, the easiest way I find was to use wet and dry sandpaper. Roughly around 600 or 800 grit. That's nice and smooth, but it gives it enough texture which scales really well for 7mm. So you'll need some PVA glue or something which is quick drying and clear drying. I cut the pieces of wet and dry to the desired size that I wanted, especially the length, the height of these columns. And after I'd done that, I'd put a coat of PVA glue on top of the plastic card strip. Now over here, I've made sure that I have kept the edge nice and square, top and the sides, because this is crucial, because as you're starting to fold the paper around, you don't want it to be off center. So make sure it's nice and square, take your time, put it down, and let this part dry before you do anything else. Once that has dried, go over your second side with some PVA. You might be able to see here, I've actually used very thick PVA. I've just basically taken it around the inside of the bottle because it's more hard as such. You get a nice big dollop of them, and it just sticks really well to both sides of the emery paper and the plastic card. Start folding the wet and dry over, making sure that everything's down, the fold is really neat, and once you've done that, you move on to side 3 and eventually side number 4. If you get any little sides kicking up, as you can see here, don't worry about that, because before we leave it to dry completely, we're going to put elastic bands around these to make sure that there's a proper flat flush seal. So once you've got glue on sides number 3 and sides number 4, fold it over. Make sure you folded everything over so that the entire piece of wet and dry is square. And that's basically it. You can see here you've got the texture already. It looks nice and scale. It's nice and square. So we're ready now to just leave it dry for a little bit. As I said before, you'll need some elastic bands. I used 3, and you'll have to space these evenly along the emery paper just to make sure that it's properly covered and you don't get any parts rising at all. You want to make sure it just dries nice and flat and flush. And there it is. Leave that to dry for a few hours. It's PVA, it won't take long. The next thing I did is cut the columns to size. So put the plastic card in a vise, grab yourself a hacksaw. It doesn't have to be as big as this one. This was just what I happened to have in the shed, and cut away. If it's not completely square and straight at this stage, don't worry, because we can always clean it up later on with a file or even a modelling knife. But for now, just cut basically at the end of the emery paper, so you're left with the rough size of what you need for the model. And there it is, that is one column. So what I did, I needed several of these, so I made 2 of them, and there they are there. So you can see them all finished, drying there on the bench, ready for the next step. I love using the Humbrol range of weathering powders and weathering washes, and what I've done is I've taken a mixture of the Humbrol yellow, dark earth, smoke and white, and mixed them in to make this sort of mustardy grey colour, which I find works really well for concrete. Once everything's dry, simply remove the elastic bands, and then we can start weathering. This is where the fun starts. Before we start the weathering, of course, there is that little bit of excess wet and dry that we no longer need. So peel it off, and with a sharp knife, just run that down the paper and cut off all the excess. Make sure, of course, you get all those little fiddly bits. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but make sure that you don't get any massive overhang. And now we start adding the weathering powders, and this you can either add as much or as little as you want. I like to do it subtly, so I build up the layers bit by bit by bit. As you're doing this process, just like any form of weathering really, have a reference photograph near you so that you know what you're achieving. Now what I wanted to achieve here is something that was very dirty as such. I know that concrete can be very light grey once it's dry and it's been there for a long time, but this is a steam shed. I wanted to make sure it looked dirty and dark because you've got oil, you've got smoke stains, And of course, if you've got a really dull day, concrete can look really dull too. So I've kept my concrete looking this mustardy dark colour. So go over it until you're happy with it, and you can see there the comparison between the wet and dry, which hasn't been weathered, and the column, which has been weathered. You can see the texture really clearly. There's all these different shades popping out from the different weathering colours. It really looks fantastic. And there they are, they're both completed, they look really good, and they're basically now ready to put into the model. I've also used a strip of wet and dry on top of the shed under the bricks, and there it is. You can see this is pre-weathering. I've got the lights in, and it just looks really good. And once the weathering was actually completed with the smoke and everything else, it looks fantastic. With the ladder in there, the locos either side, it comes to life. In my opinion, it looks absolutely brilliant. It was quick, it was simple, it was very cheap to do, and anybody can do it. It's been little techniques like this which has really brought Newton Grove to life for me, really. And this is what I'm doing it for. I'm not doing it for anybody else. I'm doing it for me. Once the shed roof is completely finished, you won't be able to see all the inside detail. We can see inside Rosegrove here, there's lots of detail there, but of course on a model we won't be able to stand inside the shed. A lot of this is going to be left. But you know what, if I'm taking photographs, or if people have a look in there at an exhibition, or if they come and see it at my place, it's just nice to know that it's there. So I hope you found this tutorial really informative. Please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification button so you know when new videos are uploaded, and I look forward to seeing you next time around Newton Grove.